to all. It's my pleasure to chair this important panel today on the role of nuclear power toward net zero decarbonization strategies. It is a very timely and relevant session for this year International Association of Energy Economics International Conference. And it's especially good that we have this opportunity to conclude this conference with a discussion on nuclear and the road toward net zero. I will start with a few remarks as chair, and I will then move on to our panel. We will have today 4 panelists taking the floor, and then we'll have time also for some panel discussion, taking questions from some of our registered participants. Now, I'll start by a simple fact, which is that nuclear is a low carbon technology. And it might state obvious to you, but as this conference is virtually in France, public opinion polls suggest that 70% of the French population still believes that nuclear contributes to climate change, in part because this is a steam coming from the cooling tower. Nuclear is very the center of energy policy debate these days, in particular in the European landscape, with coming out of 2 years where the role of nuclear in sustainable taxonomies has been heavily debated. A few weeks ago, the European Joint Research Center published a landmark report that concludes that nuclear is sustainable, and this sustainable taxonomy agenda is now moving forward. On the nuclear policy space, we are also increasingly thinking about how to link nuclear policy and the Building Back Better agenda, which is at the core of activity of international organizations such as mine at the OECD, but also from the IMF, and we will hear about this from Nicoletta today. What we can see at the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency is also a shift in the political landscape, with increasingly more countries committing to nuclear power and highlighting that it will have an important role to play toward net zero. Yet, a number of important questions remain on, let's say, the full potential that nuclear could play toward net zero. If you read the IAEA latest scenario, we anticipate a doubling of the nuclear fleet by 2050. But in fact, if you look at what the IPCC is saying more generally on that, you see that can range from doubling to multiplying by 6 the installed nuclear capacity. And in part, this is because there is this uncertainty, because there is a lot of innovation taking place, with a lot of very near-term solutions around the corner, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss some of them today. And last, there is indeed this imperative of building back better as we're moving out of the COVID-19 recovery. And what we can see at the OECD NEA is that a number of countries have been putting nuclear in the recovery plans, France being one of them. And there is also more generally a shift toward a greater recognition that infrastructure has been a sector of the economy that has sometimes faced underinvestment in the past, and that has to be at the center of recovery policy, as there again, nuclear can play a role. So there's a lot of to discuss, for that today, I'm delighted to be joined by a distinguished panel, and I will briefly introduce. We have Nicoletta Batini, who is lead director from the International Monetary Fund, Christopher Bowbrick from the UK Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, BEIS, where he is Deputy Director for Nuclear, Bilbao, who is Director General of the World Nuclear Association, also based in London, and last but not least, Valérie Faudon, who is the Executive Director of the French Nuclear Energy Society. So I will now, without further ado, pass on the floor to Nicoletta for the first presentation that will focus primarily on building back better and what some recent work from the International Monetary Fund in this field. Nicoletta, over to you.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you very much. I will start sharing my screen. See. Should be on full screen now. Can everybody see it? Can you see it?
Perfect.
Thank you. So I'm very, very glad to be able to share some thoughts here at the important session, the International Association for Energy Economics. As Michel was saying, nuclear and other forms of energy are at the center of the debate today. And at the IMF, of course, we are working deep and hard on how to build stronger economies after the COVID pandemic. And as you know from the words of our managing director, the recovery that we hope to craft through also the contribution of our policy advice is very much focused on greenness. We are developing a number of research analysis, and one of the analysis that we've conducted is precisely on the impact on the recovery of alternative forms of energy, and that is why I was invited to present a few slides today and share with you our results. Just let me clarify that, of course, this is not like the IMF official view, but we are researchers at the fund, and research is part of how we form our eventually, and we craft our advice. It's also not the view of the IEO, which is where I work. But it's been shared widely already, and this was presented at a joint seminar with the World Bank in front of 200 climate economists. And the World Bank did a parallel study to this on taxes. So here we're looking at spending, and just let me let you know that it's the work of 5 researchers, not just myself. Giovanni Melina from the research department of the IMF, Mario Di Serio, Matteo Fraggetta from the University of Salerno, and Anthony Waldron, who's a specialist and the lead analysis project of the 30 by 30 conservation study for the Convention of Biological Diversity at the University of Cambridge. What this study does is basically it looks at, as I said, what green spending, so spending to make economies greener, to transition economies to net zero, is doing to the larger economies. It's very much in the realm of the Keynesian multipliers, the work that John Maynard Keynes did in 1936. And we do this all the time as economists. We study what spending on education does to the economy, spending on health does to the economy, spending on infrastructure does to the economy. So we thought, why not looking at what green spending does to the economy, and perhaps compare it to spending on non-eco-friendly infrastructure or other activities. And so here we are. We don't take a stand here on what kind of what's the best energy source or a form of land use source. But a couple of things to note. First of all, we call green technologies and land uses what the IPCC has defined zero low carbon. Of course, this includes nuclear, and we call non-eco-friendly what the IPCC has defined high carbon, all of course in CO2 equivalent space. We know that some, as Michel was saying, some energy sources among the green ones remain controversial, like of course wind and large hydro, and perhaps nuclear in some parts of the world. But here we're interested very much in the strength of the recovery that they can bring about, if public money and private money are spent on it. So let me start just by saying what the motivation of this work is 2020 saw dramatic cuts in emissions, as we all know, and more sensitivity from the public to the climate and the biodiversity crisis. But unfortunately, as we were trying to deal with this tremendous shock, climate agenda, which was getting a lot of momentum in 2019, and we had a number of meetings scheduled internationally for 2020, became derailed because money was spent to restart economies in industries that were not really green. And so there's been a lot of calls, as you know, to build back better. That's a mantra that was used from Davos to the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. And the question then is, well, if we build back better, are we going to get the same good recovery that we would get if we just build as we have always done? And so the multiplier analysis that we do here is precisely meant to give us a handle on that. So, on latest estimates published in Nature by Liu and others in January 2021, it shows that COVID-19 took a bite out of global carbon emissions, but trends varied across the board. So world emissions, when they're measured in all 52 weeks of 2020, dropped 6.4% relative to 2019. And so in this sense, I think the pandemic has provided a unique lens on the challenge that lies ahead for nations committed to fighting climate change. Because we know from the IPCC that to keep within a 1.5 increase in temperatures relative to pre-industrial levels, emissions need to fall by 7.6% year on year over the next decade. So that's a tremendous feat. And crucially, we know that drop, that 6.4, occurred only because many parts of the world came to a forced standstill because of the pandemic. And so, we know that without collective action to curb emissions, 2020 will just be a blip in the killing curve of carbon emissions and atmospheric concentration of CO2. We know that energy contributes, about 3/4 of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, and we know from studies of the IAEA and many actors present here today at this conference that we need to double the clean energy investment to stay within at least 2 Celsius from pre-industrial levels. The paper also looks, of course, at carbon sinks, ocean, forest, mangrove spending on conservation, and we know that we need to preserve 30% of those ecosystems, but we're very, very far in terms of spending from what would be needed. We need about 7 to 10 times more spending on conservation to achieve that 30% ring fencing. Now, what are the energy transition risks? I will focus primarily, of course, on energy today. Well, there's a debate whether the public or the private should do the energy transition. And at the fund, of course, we've done a lot of work on carbon tax, which is seen, as a good way to create the right price signals for green energy relative to non-eco-friendly energy sources. But in infrastructure, really, public policy plays a key role, and we probably cannot rely just on market forces, particularly because of the time that we have to do what we have to do. So we think there should be some skin in the game. We don't discuss much this in the paper, but of course, that's a debate out there. The second risk is time, and we know that the transition has to happen in the time available. We have a carbon budget, which is being depleted very fast. There's been a bounce back, by the way, after that 6.4. And this requires, importantly, to rely on existing, well-tried and tested technology. The saying said, the shortest path is the path you know. So it's very important that we don't rely too much in the transition on sources of energy that yet don't exist or are very embryonic. We do discuss, for example, the issue of green hydrogen in the paper, which of course is a great idea, but we yet have to have it fully developed for the scaling that will be needed for a transition at the global level. So for energy, of course, low carbon base load sources, power, that remain, central and quintessential to this transition are hydro or nuclear. And we do know that hydro geographically has already been exploited quite greatly. And also we are facing increasing, erraticity in weather events and water distribution. Therefore, nuclear is extremely, central to the debate about transition. The last issue is political economy. Any green technology that we talk about needs to be brought to sufficient scale, and that, of course, needs an equilibrium, a social licensing, if you wish, by the public, because some of this forms like solar, but wind in particular, and even nuclear, sometimes require a degree of acceptance. Just a small anecdote: I'm working on the U.S. mission for their climate policy this year, and the U.S. has budgeted for its transition the creation of 2,000 wind offshore turbines. But even if people were to accept it, and there is of course some pushback from fishermen, people living on the coast in front of where these turbines have to be placed, there are actual practical issues, and there's a law called the Jones Act that which is part of the Merchant Act of 1920 that says that ships moving between U.S. ports have to be owned and operated by U.S. residents and citizens. And that means since the U.S. hasn't built capacity on turbine maneuvering fleets, these ships have to come from Europe, and they cannot move between U.S. ports, so they go from Halifax. And so the U.S. is facing a serious, important obstacles that have to, of course, be and will be most likely removed shortly. But every form of technology has some impact, and it has to be dealt with properly to bring it to scale. I just wanted to, I won't go into a lot of the detail on the data, but suffice to say that the data set that led to the preparation of this paper took about 6 months to be assembled. And we really thank you again, the transversal collaboration that was possible thanks to a number of energy agencies, including IRENA, the IEA, the IAEA, and the OECD, World Nuclear Association, as well as sister international financial institutions, country authorities across the globe, think tanks, and conservation institutions, as well as several academic centers of excellence. I want to skip some of this because I want to jump straight into some of the results here. I will skip the specification of the empirical work, which you can read in the paper, but just a quick look at the data. We are constrained by data. The data that we have is the best you can actually get at the moment globally. We have data on renewable energy for a good number of countries. It comes from the IEA. We have data on nuclear energy that is based on lowering, but has been expanded with the help of various agencies and the OECD, WNA. And we have, of course, comparable data to renewable, which is fossil fuel energy for the same set of data. The same set of countries, and the time samples are long enough to allow us to do this estimation. I want to show you a couple of charts of the results, and then I'll stop. And the co-panelists have wonderful and stimulating things to say, so I guess this can just maybe launch the debate. And these slides, shows impulse response functions from our estimates of green, that is renewable and non-eco-friendly energy investment spending. This is, of course, solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, hydro versus coal, gas, and oil. And you can see here in this little table to the right, the effect on impact on GDP of spending on green energy versus spending on non-eco-friendly energy. And then you can see it at year 1 and year 2, 3, up to 5, which is the standard in multiplier analysis. Just a clarification, so multiplier values here, this number 1.19, 1.20, should be interpreted in the standard way. For example, a value of the cumulative spending multiplier equal to 1.5 in the 3rd year would indicate that after 3 years from the occurrence of the spending shock, the cumulative increase in output for that country in dollar terms is 1.5 the size of the cumulative increase in green expenditure. So if I spend $1, after 3 years, the economy has produced $1.50. And so what comes out here quite clearly, and the little stars here, of course, are indication of the probability is above 84th, is the probability statistically significant. If you spend on green infrastructure, you get a bigger bang for the buck. It's usually about double the effect on the economy at all horizons that you do if you spend on non-eco-friendly sources. If you look at the chart to the left, which has the pink area that represent, the credible intervals delimited by the 16th and 84th percentiles, you see that spending on green energy is much more persistent and protracted. So it has a beneficial, elongated, disseminated effect on the economy, whether, the spending on non-eco-friendly is a more reduced, faster dying effect. We then looked at nuclear, and this is going to be my last slide for the moment. And nuclear shows some very high impact multipliers at the beginning. The multipliers do lose significance after year 2, but they are economically significant. And basically, I think this really indicates that there's a crowding in effect on other investments and the strong impact on GDP, which is even higher than spending on solar, wind, and other sources of energy, which are also low carbon or green. Well, these multipliers are not strictly comparable to the ones on green renewable. They, of course, are telling a story of a very strong recovery if we can center the recovery on a good percentage of spending on new nuclear reactors. And as a co-benefit, of course, we get longer GDP effects by the fact that through this clean source of energy, we can, of course, stabilize the temperature of the planet, and therefore we get all the benefits for economic prosperity from a greener planet. Let me stop here and so that we can continue the panel. Did I stop sharing? Did I stop?
Not yet.
Oh, here it is. Now it should be okay.
There we go. We're good. Thank you very much, Nicoletta, first for reminding us of this important message coming from the fund on the imperative of building back better, and also for sharing, starting to share some of the insight from your. Indeed, this is a topic that I think many of us have been discussing somewhat qualitatively in the past, and we will hear about that from the other speakers. But it's very good to have this very thorough statistical quantitative analysis that really put some hard numbers behind some of these macroeconomic impacts of nuclear program. Now, I will now turn to Chris Bowbrick from the UK BEIS to tell us a bit about what's happening with nuclear in the UK, the role that nuclear is expected to play toward net zero, and some progress with ongoing investment in nuclear new build in the UK. And I will share your slides on your behalf. Just give me a second. It's coming around the corner.
Great, thank you. So firstly, thank you to everyone for allowing me to speak today and to be on such a panel with such distinguished colleagues who I'm sure know much more about these topics than I do. I'm Chris Bowbrick. I'm one of the deputy directors in the UK government's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I look after our new and existing nuclear fleet, which I'll touch on a little bit later. I look after our engagement with communities that host nuclear power stations, with our nuclear sector and internationally. And I'm also responsible for something called the Nuclear Sector Deal, which I'll touch on a little bit later as well. So first thing I thought I'd do, if we could go on to the next slide, please, is to sort of give you an overview of the nuclear sector in the UK, to talk about the electricity system, and then touch on some of the new and exciting steps which are coming ahead as part of the nuclear sector deal, but also as part of the announcements we've made recently. And then finally, sort of segue from those announcements into what that means for advanced nuclear technologies, as well as our current generation of technologies as well. Next slide, please. So, as many of you will probably know, the UK was the world's first civil nuclear nation. We opened Calder Hall nuclear power station in 1956. This slide was entirely up to date until Monday, where the operator of our fleet, EDF, decided that they were not going to return the Dungeness nuclear power station in Kent in England to service. So this slide should say there are currently 13 reactors operating at 7 stations across England and Scotland. And last year in 2019, the UK generated about 17% of its electricity from nuclear, and that represents about 32% of all of our low carbon electricity generation. And as touched on already in this session, but a point I wanted to really reiterate is that we very much see nuclear power as green and as being ultra low carbon. So if we could move on, sorry, no, the final thing I wanted to say in terms of those stats, that 17% of electricity generated, that's about 56 terawatt hours for those that want to put that into comparison with other countries. Can I have the next slide, please? So what does that mean for our UK's electricity system, particularly as we start looking out to our net zero commitments by 2050? So firstly, our analysis shows that our electricity system is likely to double by 2050 as we seek to electrify those harder to decarbonize areas. And we've done a lot of analysis in this area. We have internal analytical teams, and they've modeled about 7,000 different sort of electricity mixes, which look at sort of different levels of demand, different levels of decarbonisation, different amounts of flexibility you need in the system, and using around 27 different technology cost combinations. So we've got around sort of 700,000 unique scenarios where we can look for those trends and look to see which are the most likely and where we need technologies that cut across those different scenarios. And I think what I wanted to say in this session is that nuclear power really plays a key role, particularly when you look at the need to decarbonize those really hard to decarbonize sectors, and the role that it plays alongside renewables and other technologies in providing that power. One of the other benefits that we really see from a United Kingdom perspective is the amount of energy density we get from nuclear. So the UK is a small place, and the amount of power you get out of nuclear compared to other technologies is really important. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a nuclear conversation if we didn't use phrases such as nuclear provides energy when the sun isn't shining, and the wind isn't blowing. But we very much see a systems approach to this, and we don't see nuclear as being any more advantageous or having disadvantages compared to other technologies. We're not trying to push nuclear in isolation. This is very much about how you need nuclear alongside renewables to deliver that whole systems approach. So I think that's a really key point that we want to emphasize and really highlight, that we're looking at this from a whole systems perspective. Could I have the next slide, please? So I briefly mentioned the nuclear sector deal. I'm sure some of you will have seen this before, and if anyone wants more detail, we'd be more than happy to provide it. The sector deal was published back in the summer of 2018. It features around 3 key themes, one around cost reduction, one about innovation, and a third on diversity. And they center around the 4 key targets which you see on the screen there, 2 of which are focused on cost reduction, so looking to reduce the cost of new build by 30%, looking to reduce the costs of decommissioning by 20% based on our current estimates, looking to increase diversity in the sector, aiming to get to 40% women in the sector, up from about 22% when the deal was signed, and lastly, looking to achieve £2 billion of domestic and international contract awards, and all 4 of those targets aiming to be achieved by 2030. One of the things we've been doing recently is, given that the deal is approaching its 3rd anniversary, is looking to sort of refresh the deal. It was never supposed to be set in stone for 11 years. It was always supposed to be something that helped the sector and helped government work together and collaborate to achieve our common aims. So we're just evolving that deal now, looking at what's worked, looking at where we can be improved, where the landscape has changed, and evolving the deal to keep pace with the current situation. Next slide, please. So this slide starts to show where we have nuclear across the UK, and some facts there on the left-hand side about Hinkley Point C. So all of the orange boxes there show our existing generation fleet, and then the green boxes show where we could potentially build gigawatt scale reactors as well. And I think this is one of the things that's really exciting for small and advanced technologies, is it opens up the opportunity to use sites which aren't necessarily on that map, but they could also be deployed at sites on that map as well. So touching briefly on Hinkley Point C, Hinkley started construction in 2016 when the UK agreed to support the first power station we'd built in a generation. And I think that's a really important point to highlight, is we hadn't built a new station in the UK for many years. So a lot of challenges at Hinkley, and making sure that the UK workforce is able to support such an ambitious project. But things are going really well at Hinkley, and we're very pleased with the efforts that are going on there. Just in terms of some facts, some sort of secondary benefits of nuclear, a total of nearly £4 billion will go into the regional economy over the lifetime of the project, and that's really important for some of the reasons that were mentioned earlier about that sort of social license. You know, it's really important to show those sort of jobs, etc., that come alongside nuclear. And then also, as some of you will probably have seen, we published at the back end of last year a energy white paper which set out how we were going to achieve our net zero carbon emissions by 2050, alongside the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. And that lays out the framework for the UK's transition to a green economy. And since then, we've also announced some very ambitious targets for Carbon Budget 6, where we think that nuclear will have a key role in helping us to achieve those targets. And alongside publishing the white paper and the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, we also announced that we're entering into negotiations with the developer of Sizewell C in Suffolk which we hope to be a copy of Hinkley Point C, so learning from experience and replication and getting the benefits that can be achieved from that. And our aim is to bring at least one large-scale nuclear plant to the point of final investment decision by the end of this Parliament, which is 2024. Next slide, please. So touched on some of the announcements that were in the Energy White Paper and the Prime Minister's 10-point plan. Some of those announcements also included our investments into advanced nuclear technology, both small modular reactors, but also advanced modular reactors. That includes £385 million for an advanced nuclear fund, which breaks down, as shown on the slide there, into those two separate buckets of money. And we're really hoping that sort of SMRs can sort of prove that they can be cheaper, quicker to build than gigawatt scale power stations, particularly the advantages that come from modular construction and the ability to assemble off-site and then build them on-site rather than the more traditional stick builds, which we tend to see with gigawatt scale plants. Also on the slide there, we have the £170 million for a research and development programme on advanced modular reactors. And again, some of the secondary benefits we see there, the ability to operate at very high temperatures, for example, allow us to look at things like production of hydrogen, synthetic fuel, so going beyond just the traditional roles of providing electricity. And then lastly, also investing £40 million into developing regulatory frameworks, upskilling the regulator, and also to support the UK's supply chain in being able to deliver against these ambitious goals. So that was all I was going to touch on today. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today, and looking forward to the discussions and questions that come along. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. You covered a lot of ground. I think especially take from your presentation the importance of really looking at this issue from a system perspective, and the fact that you don't need to oppose nuclear and renewables, and that on the way toward net zero, you really see the combination of both as really being the best path forward to achieve your ambitious objectives. Now, I would like very much to turn toward Sama Bilbao-Leon. Sama is the Director General of the World Nuclear Association, and as such, you bring to us a worldwide view on the perspective of the industry on the role of nuclear toward decarbonization. Sama, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michel. And once again, thank you to the International Association of Energy Economics, and to you, Michel, and the organizers for inviting us to participate in this event. And of course, it is a true pleasure to be in this virtual stage with such a distinguished panel, many of whom are friends, and I very much look forward to the discussion. So hopefully you are now seeing my slides, Michel. Yes. I hope yes. So I will go through my slides relatively quickly because as Nicoletta said, I really would like to move forward to the discussion, which I think will be very interesting. So first, for some of you that are not familiar with World Nuclear Association, we are an international organization that represents the global nuclear industry, and this includes more than 180 members from 44 countries in all continents that represent the entire nuclear fuel cycle, plus, this entire ecosystem of supporting industries and supporting organizations. So what I'm going to talk about has been picked from many of the art publications, and of course several others. I tend to have very good references to everything that you will see. So I encourage you to dig deeper, and if you see something that interests you in what I'm going to present, please go to the reference and understand better where it comes from and where it goes to. But once again, I encourage you also to visit our website. There is a wealth of information there, and I think it could be useful for many of you. So I will start my presentation like I always do, trying to put a box around the challenge that we have in front of us. And I really cannot emphasize enough, it's already been said by some, that we have in front of us a challenge that is not only enormous, but incredibly urgent. So we really don't have a minute to waste to address this. And we really are going to need all hands on deck. So but I really also want to emphasize that in fact we are nowhere near moving in the right direction. So for example, if you look at this leftmost chart, you see that the percentage of low carbon electricity that we have today at a global level is exactly the same, more or less, that we had at the very beginning of the 21st century. So essentially, despite this perception that many of us have, that we have been investing a lot of money and a lot of effort in renewable and green technologies, the reality is that we haven't moved an inch. We still are exactly where we were. And that is clearly proven by the compendium that the UNFCCC just did recently when they were trying to compile all the national determined contributions, and they calculated that we have more or less we have achieved less than 1% of the 43% carbon reductions that we need to achieve in order to be somewhat on track to the 2-degree reduction scenario. So less than 1% to 43%. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's really staggering. But the thing, though, is this is even more dramatic if you think that when we are looking at the less developed nations, they definitely would like to use clean energy, but their number one priority is to develop their quality of life and the socioeconomics in these countries to a level that is equivalent to the one that many of us are enjoying in Western countries. So this, of course, adds a new dimension to this decarbonization. Yes, we need to decarbonize, but we need to do it in a way that is just and fair and doesn't leave anybody behind. So what is the role of nuclear in this context? Well, there is a myriad of scenarios, and you've heard about some, and I know that we will hear more, but in all of them, there is an essential role that has been already pictured for nuclear in this deep decarbonization. So certainly, depending on the ambitions that the scenarios are looking forward, depending on the demand reductions that you are looking in the 2015 range, you can have different capacities of nuclear, but certainly it is going to be quite important. And this is what I'm showing you here. This is exclusively for the generation of electricity. But of course, I don't have to remind you that nuclear energy is the only low carbon energy source that can produce electricity, yes, but also heat. And this brings us with very, very exciting opportunities, because we are now going to be able to use this zero carbon nuclear heat to decarbonize several very hard to abate sectors. For example, the heating and cooling for conditioning of buildings that can be used with residential district heating. We can also use nuclear heat for process heat in many industrial processes, chemical, petrochemical, cement, concrete, steel, etc. We can also use nuclear for the production of fresh water, which is becoming a huge issue as we are looking at the impacts of climate change. And then finally, well, not finally, and one more thing is the importance of nuclear for the production of hydrogen and synthetic fuels. So I don't have to tell you, because this has become mainstream by now, that hydrogen is an energy vector that is offering new opportunities for wider decarbonization. And of course, the key here is how we are producing this hydrogen. So hydrogen is already pervasive in many areas of our industry and our economy. But if we are able to produce low carbon or zero carbon hydrogen, as we are showing in this slide, there is a potential to introduce hydrogen to decarbonize new sectors, such as, for example, transport, in particular heavy transport, maybe directly through hydrogen, or through potentially synthetic fuels or ammonia for the shipping industry, or for the air travel industry. So again, quite exciting opportunities. So what is happening in nuclear? So nuclear, as you know, and as you've heard, is being a major contributor to decarbonization for the last 4 or 5 decades, but we continue evolving. So there is a lot of excitement in nuclear, in new nuclear of all sizes around the world. So we have several new countries that have joined the nuclear family in 2020, the United Arab Emirates and Belarus. And of course, we are very much looking forward to welcoming Turkey and Bangladesh in the next couple of years. We also have seen new reactor designs that have been made available in 2020, such as the Huanglong 1 type reactor in China. And then also we have the first small modular reactor, a floating reactor that was connected to the grid in Quebec. I mean, and it's producing not only electricity, but heat in this remote area of the northeast Russia. And then of course we have small modular reactors. There is many technologies. There is over 70 different concepts, some of them in different stages of development and deployment. Some of them are about to start construction. Some of them are already being constructed. So again, a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunities. And of course, I think that many of you know that small modular reactors may be a very important game changer to introduce nuclear, perhaps for new applications and in new markets. Small modular reactors, they bring potential changes in the business model, being maybe more affordable, more scalable, having shorter payback periods, and also because of the smaller size of the overall project, it may be easier to de-risk financially the project, which means that it's going to be easier to find affordable financing for these projects. So you see here, once again, many of the applications that we can use for these small modular reactors, again, not only for electricity, but also for heat. And looking at the market opportunities of partnering nuclear energy with many other industries and with many other economic activities within Europe, and obviously this is just a painting of Europe, but the same is applicable from all over the world. So clearly, nuclear hydrogen is something that we need to take into account, that is going to become a very important opportunity once again, because this can be zero carbon hydrogen that is going to be instrumental to decarbonize many of these other sectors. And just as importantly, this can be done at a cost that is cost effective, competitive with other ways of producing hydrogen, whether they are with other renewable energy sources that are low carbon. So clearly exciting opportunities here. And actually this goes even further because, as you know, because nuclear energy is such a concentrated energy source that it allows us to deploy these enormous amounts of energy with a very small use of land space, land use, but also other materials, raw materials, and other resources. So again, this allows a very effective use of our resources around our space. And then something that, of course, Nicoletta already explained, and this is quite important in the context of the COVID recovery, is that nuclear projects, when we have a nuclear project, the investment that we have, oops, I don't know what happens with my slides. The investment that we have is actually going to trickle down in many other sectors of the economy. And this, of course, are very high quality jobs that are going to stay on for many years, and are going to provide quality of life for many people. So, but now let me look back a little bit on what does the nuclear industry need to do to actually seize this opportunity and take advantage of where we are to deliver on all these promises. So we are working with our members and with many other organizations to make sure that we sustain and enhance the current nuclear capabilities. And this, of course, includes the existing fleet of nuclear power plants, but also all the infrastructure, whether it's research and development, operations, supply chain, etc., to maintain these capabilities. We are looking towards finding disruptive technologies that can be deployed effectively within the context of nuclear at a global basis. And this, of course, is going to require some transformation within the overall nuclear regulatory frameworks that are going to facilitate this. Of course, everything in nuclear is much more effective if it's done at a multilateral level. So multilateral cooperation is going to be essential. And this is part of the reason why we try to work very closely with our colleagues at the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency, the International Energy Agency, and many other multilateral organizations. So the long story short is the nuclear industry does have quite a lot of work that we need to do in order to deliver on all these promises. But I also want to highlight that government support is going to be absolutely essential. So, and when I say support, I don't mean financial support exclusively. I mean, clearly in some occasions, the financial support is going to be necessary. But what is actually much more important than that is the consistent and predictable communications on nuclear. So the idea that government is going to instill confidence and incentivize long-term planning and long-term investment in these nuclear projects. This way we are going to be able to align public investment that sometimes have different timelines with the lifetime of these nuclear projects. So in that sense, the role of the government to make sure that there's a level playing field, both in policies and in markets, is going to be very important to ensure that nuclear can fairly compete with other low carbon technologies. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that we can unlock low-cost financing is going to be indispensable, because yes, nuclear powers are capital intensive just as much as all low-carbon technologies, but given the size of the financing costs, it is imperative to shrink that as much as possible by making sure that we actually have affordable financing. So maybe just let me end explaining how, from our point of view, nuclear energy is a key contributor to economic development today, and clearly it can continue to be moving forward. But just as importantly, it can do so by helping develop and actually deliver this transition to clean energy that many countries are actually posing themselves for. We really want to use this economic resurgence that we are looking after COVID by using all these funds to move forward to a clean energy. And we truly think that nuclear can be a very important part of that picture. So I think I'll stop here, Michel, and I'll look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sama. I think it's fair to say you covered a lot of ground. I just highlight two points in your presentation. First, the fact that there is indeed a very strong near-term innovation pipeline of nuclear, and as part of that, nuclear goes far more is far more than just electricity, and that in particular nuclear heat application, hydrogen can be key contribute elements where nuclear can contribute to decarbonization. And the second part is indeed that there's a lot that has been done by the industry, but that governments have really an essential role to unlock all this innovative technology and make sure that they are deployed at scale in the near term. So now our last presenter before moving to the panel discussion is Valérie Faudon from the French Nuclear Energy Society. Being virtually in France, it's very good, Valérie, to have you here to tell us about the role that nuclear play in the French context, and in particular, what are the near-term decisions that have to be taken in France for nuclear?
Thank you very much, Michel, and thank you very much to all the speakers for their very interesting presentations. So I'm going to talk briefly about nuclear in France today and tomorrow, and its role into achieving the country's goal in terms of net zero emissions in 2015. So first, just a comment of who is my organization. So we are the French Nuclear Society. So we've a learned society of nuclear scientists. And we have published a lot of reports as part of the energy debates that have been going on for about 10 years in France on the future of nuclear since the election of François Hollande in 2012. And our goal is to really, with these studies, and I'll share some of the findings with you, to contribute to the public debate so that to make sure it is an informed debate with a lot of useful data. Because nuclear is not that easy to understand for people coming from other sectors. Okay, so nuclear in France. So nuclear represents about 70% right now of our electricity mix. In the 1970s, more than 70% of our electricity was coming from fuel, which is really incredible. So after the oil shock, we decided to get out of fuel. At that time, in 1973, EDF was the number one consumer of oil in the country. And now you can see that we are more than 90% of our electricity who is made from low carbon source. So I invite you, if you haven't gone, to visit with website, which is electricitymap.org. And I'm not going to try to play the video because by experience, videos on Zoom are difficult to play, but you will see that we are green and remain green. That means we are nearly fully decarbonized together with Norway, which is a hydro country, and Sweden and Switzerland, who share with us a mix of nuclear. So in the case of Sweden and Switzerland, it's 30%, for us it's 70%, and a lot of hydro. So our electricity mix in 2020 is lower than 50 grams per kilowatt hour. So we're really happy about that. We have shut down a lot of thermal plants, and we contribute a lot to lowering the emissions of our neighbors because 10% of our electricity is actually exported to our immediate neighbors. So first benefit, of course, is full decarbonization. Second benefit is that we have the lowest electricity retail prices in Western Europe. So of course, you're going to tell me Netherlands, but actually Netherlands have very low taxes on electricity. We have actually, as you see, Germany is 50% higher retail price than France, and we are very happy about that. And it's a good benefits not to the French households, but also to the French industry. And some of the industries we have, I'm thinking about aluminum, for instance, where electricity price is between 30 and 50% of the total cost of the industry, have not gone to out of Europe because we have this nuclear electricity that enables them to have a low cost and of course decarbonized cost. And if I take an example, a ton of aluminum produced in France is less than 2 tons of CO2. And when it's produced in China, it's about 15 tons of CO2. So it's a big benefit for the decarbonization of industry. A third big benefit that we have from the nuclear fleet in France is that it's flexible and it can actually load follow. It's really specific, and more and more countries are able to do that, but we are doing it really well. We do more or less 80% of production on 1 unit in 30 minutes. So this is an example from March 2020, and you've seen that we've been able to load follow on the demand of electricity, but also on production of wind, which is blue, and solar, which is orange, by nearly 10 gigawatts, so nearly 25% of the capacity that we had online at that time. And last but not least, so we have the second biggest fleet in the world behind the US. We have right now 56 units, reactors, but of course we also have a lot of other nuclear sites, research sites with CEA, but also nuclear fuel cycle sites with new plants for conversion and enrichment in France by Orano. So we have the third biggest industrial sector in France behind aerospace and automotive, with more than 220,000 employees, 3,000 companies, 6 billion euros of export, 2 billion of electricity, and 4 billion of services. And we are very high level, and I think some of you mentioned it, our employees are very qualified there. Their level of qualification is twice the average of the French industry. And we provide a lot of training to our employees. It's 9 days of professional training per employee on average per year. So that's huge. That's, we train a lot. So this is it for the today, nuclear in France today. So I'm going to talk a bit about tomorrow. So we're lucky that our government has done a scenario for net zero. It's actually now mandatory by law since 2015 that the government does that and updates it regularly. So we have this called the Stratégie Nationale Bas Carbone for 2050, which details the consumption and the emissions by sector. So one outcome from this scenario is that we need to increase the electricity consumption by 30% to reach our goals by 2050. So of course, the electricity sector is already decarbonized, but we still have to decarbonize the transport sector, which is the upper left chart, and also the household and habitat segment, which the heating sector. So as you can see, one of the big means that we're planning to use to decarbonize the transport sector is, of course, moving to EVs and electrical vehicles that provides a lot, of course, of that provides a need for increased electricity production. But not only, we have recently released an important hydrogen plan, which was done after this work was done. So the hydrogen plan was released last September. And in this plan that had been released early 2020, we had 50 terawatt hour of low carbon hydrogen and synthetic fuel in 2050. So we had a need for 50 terawatt hour of electricity. But now RT, which is our transport company, is studying an upside of 120 terawatt hour of electricity in 2050 for us to be able to produce the hydrogen and synthetic fuel that we need by that time. So hydrogen is actually something we have studied. So I'd just like to share with you something. We are a bit special because our electricity grid is already decarbonized. So they are, of course, we're not the only ones in the world, but we are a bit special versus the other countries. So when you look at the strategy at the EU level, first it's very focused on renewable hydrogen. Of course, they allow for what they call low carbon hydrogen, but it's very focused on renewable only hydrogen. And when we do calculation, and several studies have done it, and we have done it as well, it's very clear by 2030, Europe will not have enough renewable electricity to produce this renewable hydrogen. So some study goes as far as say that we'll need to import into Europe about half of our hydrogen. So the French government strategy is actually very much to see how we can leverage the nuclear fleet to become a key player in low hydrogen production, to at least keep our energy independence, because we don't want, we had this history of being very dependent on oil for our electricity production, and we got out of it. And I think the country really doesn't want to replace dependence on fossil fuels that we currently have. For instance, all our oil, all our gas is important. We have no oil, no gas. To replace this dependency with a new dependency, which is imported hydrogen. So there has been a new plan announced, as you see, 7.2 billion. That was announced in September 20. There's a mistake on my slide. It's of course up to 2030. And the idea is to develop models where we use our electricity grid, which is, as I said, below 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, to enable H2 productions at 2.75 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is below the threshold that was decided in the European taxonomy. So the idea is to produce hydrogen on the site and transport the electricity through the transport network, through the grid, and produce hydrogen on the site where it's going to be consumed. And we believe this will allow better economics and a faster uptake, because when we do the electrolysis at the site of consumption, whether it's an industrial site or transport hub, we can adjust production to needs, and we save money in conditioning, storage, and transportation of hydrogen. And the second thing, which makes it really interesting, is that, of course, we have a very strong load factor for electrolyzers, up to 6,000 a year. And we also have less need for electrolysis capacity. We can provide grid electricity services. So we just released a report on that. So I wanted to share with you, because we have a task force working on that with the hydrogen industry, actually. So to be able to do all of that, to decarbonize our transport and to produce a lot of low carbon hydrogen, we need to secure our electricity supply. And actually, we need to have a strategy really fast, because our fleet is starting to be a bit old. And this is a simulation on the right. It was built incredibly fast. I mean, there were years in the 80s where we put up to 8 new reactors a year on the grid. So we had a bit of a profile that China has at that time, industrially speaking. And all of these reactors are going on there to reach 60 years at the same time, very fast. So we have, as you see on the right chart, some kind of a cliff effect. That means we have to start to have a strategy to renew this capacity. And it's all the more difficult that, of course, it's dispatchable capacity. So it's very difficult. We have limited hydro sites. All our hydro sites are saturated. So we need to find solutions. And of course, nuclear is part of a solution to be able to replace this capacity that we're going to lose extremely fast in the 2050 and the 40s. And that's exactly the debate we currently have right now on, shall we start renewing the fleet or not? So we have lots of activities right now, lots of scenarios coming, a very big one coming in September. Our scenario that we did with Compass Lexicon in June last year, and we published, actually brings the attention that it's actually urgent to start renewing the fleet and start building again, and have an industrial program to do it, because of this cliff effect that can be a problem for the security of supply of a country. So we have very big challenges. Of course, not only we need to renew our fleet, but we need to renew all our renewable fleet by that time. We have to reach carbon neutrality, not only on electricity, we're already there, but on the whole economy. And we need to ensure security of supply, knowing that Europe is going to have a lower share of dispatchable capacity. So what we don't know, and that makes it very uncertain for us, is that we don't know what our neighbors are going to do. They make a lot of announcements, but for instance, the closure of coal. But once again, this is going to decrease a lot the dispatchable capacity in Europe. We don't know the demand. There are lots of scenarios on demand, and we think they're quite conservative, because they predict a lot of changes in consumers' behavior. And of course, we have no idea what consumers will accept. And also, we see a lot of scenarios with a lot of bets on technologies that are not available. There is actually a scenario from IAEA and RT in France that shows that we need 60, to be able to do without nuclear, we need 60 gigawatts of flexibility, which is the size of the French fleet by 2050. So this is huge. And this comes from technologies that are not right now at the industrial stage. So that provides a lot of uncertainty. That goes back to a comment that was said earlier, that we need to actually count on technologies that are mature and are available now. So we see 3 risks. A lower deployment of renewables. We have huge acceptance issues right now, especially on, there's a big debate in the last 2 weeks on wind. Some political parties have called for a moratorium on wind deployment. We have to avoid dependency on non-available technologies. And also we need to find a business model, because one of the OECD reports shows really well, and our study shows it as well, is the increased price volatility when you have a lot of intermittent sources of supply on your grid. So the current plan is under instruction, so expect anytime soon this summer or early September, an official report from the government of what is the plan to build 6 new EPRs as part of an industrial program. So the sector, the nuclear sector, is working on a plan for construction excellence, and they have been working now for nearly 2 years, and they have received help from the government, especially in the areas of skills and knowledge, with a creation of what we call Université Nuclear University. The expected cost from this program is about 50 billion, so that's about 2 billion per year. And the financing plan is not yet announced, but state involvement is expected. So as I said, the plan should be released this summer. And our president said that the decisions would be taken just after the election. So we expect a decision end of 22, early 23. And of course, we're very impatient, because we believe we should start the construction as soon as possible to be able to deal with this cliff effect that's going to arrive in 2040. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Valérie, for this overview of what's happening in France, and the fact that indeed a decision regarding nuclear is very much at the center of the decisions that have to be taken in the coming months, if not 1 or 2 years, in France. Now, we still have about 20 minutes for a panel discussion, and so I'd like to invite our 4 panelists to maybe switch the camera back on. I'd like to thank all 4 of them once again for excellent presentation, and I think we really gained from a very complementary perspective on the role of nuclear power. Maybe I would like to start by going back to the presentation of Nicoletta and on the imperative of building back better. We had some questions, in fact, on that in the Q&A, in particular on whether your results vary depending on whether you were a country that was primarily relying on fossil fuel import, or a country that was exporting fossil fuel. So I don't know whether you wanted to answer that, and maybe tell us a bit more also how what has been the reception from your paper that has been published since I think March, if I remember correctly.
Thank you, Michel. So the paper is of course being very well received. The fund has been since the the new managing director moved in, insisting on the need of green investment. There are notes on it. But even in October, she just arrived in October 2019. Our fiscal monitor, which is one of the 3 IMF flagships, had an analytical chapter, which are the way we convey our main analysis to our membership on mitigating climate change. And there, of course, it was very clear that the direction that the fund was giving to this, and of course, referring to the IPCC need for a good mix of reliable technologies to go green. So, this study is yet another, I think, pillar in that bridge, intellectual bridge we're trying to make for our members, and trying to understand, what the impact. We look at the economy, we don't look at the at the energy, because we're not engineers, but we can speak a little bit about what the impact economically of this is. So I think in terms of the questions that were in the chat, there was a question about whether the effect would be different if you're a fossil fuel importing country or if you're a fossil fuel based economy. The analysis we do here doesn't have anything to do with the export of an economy. So if you're a fossil fuel producer, of course you would have receipts from export of that commodity. This is not what we're looking at here. Here we're looking at if you build like a nuclear reactor, if you build a wind farm, if you build a large hydro, what's the impact on the local national community in terms of economic activity that is being generated. It's not about what you do with that electricity or that power source or that that product. So in fact, a lot of countries that invest in infrastructure, for example, on fossil fuel, they have to buy land rights in other countries to do that drilling, or they have to import fossil fuel to operate those plants. So there's actually a net negative, a double whammy, if you wish, on the economy for that reason. And that is why we also believe that these multipliers of the fossil fuel, gas, natural gas, and oil and coal are much smaller than one, not just smaller than the green ones, they're actually smaller than one. So when John Maynard Keynes talked about multiplication, well, the word multiplication, I think, we all know what it means. It's a number bigger than one, right? So you put one and you get something bigger than one, maybe not two, but at least 1.1, something which is above one. But the multipliers of fossil fuels are actually below one. And the reason why that we've been looking at this and actually tallying it with sectoral studies, comparing looking at the activity generated, for example, by renewables or even nuclear and non-renewables for some sectors, some countries in particular, and some particular investments. The fossil fuels tend to be less labor intensive, and they have much more imported content, not just on the operation of the plants. So to run the plant, you need oil or gas itself, but also actually on the the parts, and often these are also offshore. They could be big oil rigs that take parts produced by other countries, and so there's a tremendous amount of leakage in the spending that a government or a private sector does to produce this to make this these plants come to reality. So the second question that was about the time series, that one is there's a short history of green investment. The data is actually quite longish, for Bayesian estimation, so that's really not a concern. And we're comparing one with one. In fact, an investment that occurs, say, in 2010, will be measured vis-a-vis an investment in green that was done the same year. Over then the period of time, it's a panel VER. So these issues are very well discussed in the context of the paper, which I posted. So if people are interested, they can go check out what the strategy. But these strategies, we also used it for example, estimation on just investment, not on energy, for example, right? Just for example, residential investment, and it's the same technique. And these are double blind peer-reviewed papers that come out every day, in the academic literature. So this is very standard stuff that we're doing here. Hands on the table.
Thank you, Nicola. One question that just came up, and maybe for you, but also for the other panelists, how do you explain the fact that the result for nuclear tends to be much stronger than for other technology, including green technology, of course? Yeah.
I think, I mean, of course, there are experts here on the panel that can talk to me, Valérie, Sama, but I mean, my take on this is that these are larger investments that engulf, you know, a number of professions, from engineers to regulators to local communities. You know, there are permits, and the process is quite, you know, quite convoluted, also because of the very heavy and strict regulation for safety of nuclear, which, by the way, are not, unfortunately, are not translated into other forms of energy, right? So we know that, you know, I'm almost like a neophyte here in a nuclear, and I was looking at all energy sources to see. I'm not particularly, you know, of any interest in nuclear, but when I was looking at accidents, you know, most of the accidents are actually in other forms of green energy. If you want to look at green energy or renewable energy, you know, hydro and another form. So I think it's really got to do with the intensity of labor and the fact that it also generates spillovers for the local community. Also, a lot of these reactors are done specifically for a country and for the geomorphological characteristics of each country. So while there is some cookie cutting that can be done, I mean, there's a lot of like localized study that has to be done as well. And that it generates, you know, I think a good wave of activity for, you know, the professionals of a country. So, but really, I think there's the best suited to answer this question are probably Sama and Valérie, who and
yeah. Over to you, Valérie. Your mic is on. Maybe you want to go first.
Yes, we have actually done some work a little bit because as part of the France, the equivalent of the American jobs plan, right? Which is a Poland's relaunch plan that was done by the French government back in September. We've worked on trying to see the economics effect of the French new build program. And so we found some really interesting numbers that had been published in the early 2011 by Pricewaterhouse. We know that, for instance, building one reactor in France is about 8,000 jobs, 4,000 on-site, 4,000 off-site. And this is only for direct and indirect. So I think there are new studies that are going on to see what are the ones that are beyond indirect, which I think are, can help me a little bit, Michel, because you're French, so you know. And
induced jobs.
Induced, okay, yes. Perfect, jobs. And the other thing we know, but I think that differs from one country to another. In our country, 90% of the value added is local. That means that we still have a full supply chain in France. We are able not only to build the plant, but also to make most of the components. So what we hope actually is that it may decrease because we are looking at other countries in Europe that are considering a new build program. So not only UK, but also Poland, Czech Republic, where we believe we can really build again a full European supply chain. By leveraging the different projects that we'll have. And I think it's critical because I know, Chris, UK is rebuilding skills, but for us, we feel and great that you are here because we are a bit lonely of being able to carry the competence on building new installations in Europe, because we actually believe that whole Europe will need it. At some point in time, they will realize it. And then we need at least to be a few countries to maintain the knowledge, to develop the knowledge, to develop the competence, to make sure we have a qualified supply chain, to be able to really restart building again when we will realize we'll need it. I'm really confident. I've seen in France that the attitude toward nuclear has changed a lot. It's just 1 year and a half. And I've seen debates happening in countries like Holland or Sweden that didn't happen before. So I really have this vision that we'll be building new nuclear soon, once we realize that we cannot do without it, of course, but we need also to build a lot of renewables. And at that time, we'll need to have supply chains ready and people who are knowledgeable enough to really rebuild again. I don't know if I answered the question, but
excellent. Sama, Chris, do you want to quickly follow up? Or?
I think that everything that was, I think that both Nicoletta and Valérie did a great job. And in any case, I'd say that perhaps Chris could say much more about the trickle-down economy because of what they are experiencing in the UK with Hinkley Point, Charlie, etc. So,
thank you. I'm not sure I have huge amounts to add. I think a lot of the key points have been made. I think the key element for me is the growth that can come to quite remote parts of the UK, and I presume that the same principle will apply in other countries as well, where it can be quite hard to find jobs for people in those parts of the countries, and nuclear offers that opportunity, and not only jobs but really good, high-skilled, well-paid jobs as well. So I think you've got, we always talk about nuclear skills and skills for nuclear. And therefore, you've got that kind of direct nuclear skill set, building, operating, decommissioning power stations, for example. But you've also got all those indirect ones as well, which are, the catering and all of those sorts of skills that you need in order to deliver projects of this magnitude. So I think that the opportunity is huge, and the ability to skill people who can then work in other sectors as well. So we see a lot of those skills as transferable between green sectors. They're not necessarily nuclear skills, they're high value engineering skills and science skills as well.
And it's not only engineers, I think it's also a lot of technical jobs like welders. It's very fashionable to talk about welders. But we have initiatives, for instance, in Normandy, where we have several employers that from other industries as well. We also have a submarine industry in Normandy. And so we're training together, and we go to the unemployment office and we say, we just want people who have the right soft skills, and we will train them. And they're not necessarily just young students, and they can be older. We train them, we do the whole training. And after that, of course, these skills will benefit to the whole territory for other industries as well.
So maybe one thing that I will add, Michel, I know we have very few minutes left, but just perhaps the one thing that I haven't heard is the opportunities that we have to retool and retrain some of the people that are currently working in the fossil fuel industry, that obviously we cannot move forward leaving those people behind. So there are also quite a few opportunities to transform those energy workers into clean energy workers, perhaps engaging them in the nuclear industry. So of course, I think many of you heard about the launch, I think it was last week, of the Natrium project in Wyoming, where they are actually planning to do exactly that. And I know that there are several other opportunities. So again, it's not just the nuclear industry that can contribute to help people that are looking into retraining and moving to different sectors.
Thank you, Sama. I think essential that we don't only talk about building back better, but we also talk about this just transition perspective, and indeed
exactly.
Exciting things happening, in particular in terms of color.
What you're saying, Sama, is exactly what they want to do in Poland as well, with all
exactly, yeah.
And somehow they have the same jobs actually, because they're steam engines in the end. They're thermal plants, so lots of the jobs are actually common.
Yeah. No, I think it was very good that we could, link, the very quantitative results from Nicoletta papers, trickling down to really, what that means in terms of jobs on the ground. Now, time is running out. We had a lot more questions planned, but I don't think we'll have really time to go back to them. So maybe I would just give the floor to all of you for maybe 30 seconds closing comment. In particular, I think a question I had for you is what really makes you the most optimistic about the future of nuclear, be it in your country, regionally, or globally. Valérie, do you want to go first? Going in reverse order?
Yes, I talk behind of the network of nuclear scientists, because we just released last week declaration with a title which is Net Zero Needs Nuclear, and we are 100 associations worldwide of nuclear scientists, of young professionals, and women in nuclear. There are 55 chapters of women in nuclear in 55 countries. And what we want in preparation of COP26 is that nuclear be part of a climate conversation, because what we see, and I think Sama said it really well, is that we're not making progress, and we will not make progress unless we use all the available solutions now. And we cannot, to quote Fatih Birol, we don't have luxury to choose our preferred solution now. We have to go for all solutions.
Indeed. Sama, in 2 words?
2 words. Well, yeah, I am optimistic because I think I have started to see a little bit of a sense of urgency within the nuclear industry, which is what my main people that I talk to day to day. And I really hope that we can continue to keep the momentum. So make sure that in fact we deliver on all these. They're not just promises. I mean, there are other things that need to happen to make it all be real. But we really are getting this sense of urgency, and we are going to be ready to support the world to reach these objectives of decarbonization.
Chris?
Thank you. I think to me, it's all about the dialogue. It's all about the conversation and the narrative. We've obviously got a huge opportunity with COP26 this year. And I think as we start looking forward to all of these sort of ambitious and exciting activities across the world, let's just keep talking and keep making that point of sort of a systems approach to energy, of which nuclear is a key component of that. So looking forward to continuing the dialogue with you all over the coming months and years. Thank you.
And maybe Nicoletta, more generally on building back better.
Well, I think, you know, for us in Washington and in this international institution, the trick is to be able to rethink and to disrupt the way we have been guiding countries, or keeping a debate, you know, focused on certain paradigms. And I think for us, getting more involved into sectoral issues like energy is very important. Getting to know what the energy world is doing and how we should enmesh it into the macroeconomic advice is very important. So I'm very grateful that, you know, you invited me here, and I hope we can continue to walk side by side and in creating a better world for everybody. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all very much. I think it was a very insightful panel. We are 2 minutes over time, so I will stop here. And again, thank you all for participating, and I look forward to further engagement with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.